This is an experience I wouldn't wish on anyone.
After nearly 3 years of nonstop work, prosecutors handling Bryan Kohberger's case reflect on what it took to reach this point, with the killer now behind bars for life.
I think anyone who doesn't feel some emotions in this case has something wrong with them.
According to People, the evidence suggests that after both victims were killed or unresponsive, they were posed in their shared bed. Kaylee was moved from a position with her head on her pillow to partially atop of Madison. Then the comforter was placed over them both. That's according to Dr. Turvey. That's what he said about the crime scene according to the filing. I do think it's interesting that Kohberger placed a comforter over both of the victims. It's the same thing we saw in the Amanda Knox case and also in the JonBenet Ramsey case. It suggests potentially a connection and familiarity with the victim, and we'll return to this point momentarily.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
According to People, Dr. Brent Turvey, the crime scene expert for the defense, first posited this theory after reviewing the autopsy reports. It's important to note that Dr. Turvey was going to testify as a defense witness, and this already puts his testimony in some doubt, certainly as far as I'm concerned. But there is some merit to his suppositions. According to People, the theory was based on the location of Kaylee's blood on the pillow, which prosecutors had argued did not support that the bodies were posed, only that they were moved. Now, that makes more sense to me. Perhaps they were moved because Kohberger was missing the knife sheath and knew he was, and so he was looking for it. Personally, I don't think Kohberger had enough time to pose the victims, and doing so carried in an enormous risk of leaving behind DNA and other transfer evidence, including from the victims to himself. According to People, prosecutors called Turvey's theory a possibility but not a determination, noting in the filing that the blood could have spread because Kaylee moved during the attack or after suffering a blow to the head. Furthermore, argued prosecutors, it would be impossible to know what the true intentions of the killer were, even if the two, Maddie and Kaylee, were moved. Well, I'm not sure about that. I would never say it's impossible to know the motivations of murderers. Even when one is dealing with a sick puppy like Kohberger, I think we can fathom what to some seems to be unfathomable. I will say that given Kohberger's interest in gratuitous violence, even violent porn, it's possible that he wanted to duplicate something he had seen somewhere in terms of this crime scene. Now, another aspect that gives us insight into Kohberger's murderous psychology, not so much generally, but I think within the specific circumstances of the crime scene, are the autopsy details listing simply the number of stabbings. Now, I must apologize in advance for covering this what probably seems to be in a clinical manner. Clearly, the crime itself is ghastly, and what the victim suffered was terrible, which is why I won't dwell on the details any longer than is absolutely necessary. According to People, Xana Kernodle was stabbed more than 50 times and suffered mostly defensive wounds. That's according to the report. She died of a laceration in her right lung and 2 lacerations in her heart. Xana Kernodle suffered the most injuries, and I believe Ethan Chapin suffered the least. The reason for this, I think, is clear and obvious. Xana was the only one of the 4 victims that was ambulant at the time, that is to say, awake and upright during the attack. In other words, she was on her feet. She put up the most resistance, and she was also the last victim putting up the toughest resistance. Remember, Kaylee and Maddie were attacked first, and both were lying in bed, half asleep, and perhaps to some extent under the influence, when Kohberger launched at them from the open door. According to the same article, the autopsy report determined that both young women died from multiple sharp force injuries, with Kaylee being stabbed at least 38 times. Maddie suffered 28 stab wounds. This really gives you a sense of how vicious this crime was. Kohberger stabbed Kaylee at least 24 times in the face and Maddie 13 times in the face. Ever heard of the saying, cut off your nose to spite your face? Well, I don't think Kohberger attacking the victims' faces was random. I think by the time he committed the murders, he hated their attractiveness and their easy lives as he saw it because of it. I think there was even kind of an incel-like hatred of the opposite sex, and he wanted to take that away from them. I also still believe that his primary victim was Maddie, and I'm not convinced he intended to kill anyone else in the house that night if he could have gotten away with that. I don't think he intended to kill everyone in the house, otherwise he would have. Cumulatively, the victims were stabbed more than 150 times in total. This orgy of violence actually saved Dylan Mortenson's life, because I think after killing Xana, Kohberger was not only exhausted but unnerved by what had taken place. I also think the 150 stab wounds indicate an amateur. I think a serial killer, an experienced killer, or even a killer that had received even some basic training would have killed each victim more effectively, as horrible as that sounds. We saw that in Brentwood, actually, the killer that received training before those murders, which is why Nicole Brown was stabbed 12 times. Goldman, who the killer didn't expect and put up a fight, was struck about 20 times, twice as many times as Nicole Brown Simpson. Now, there's one more insight I want to share. Although I have viewed some of the crime scene photos, I'm only going to reproduce one. This image from the inside of Maddie's bedroom shows her pink boots on the windowsill, and you can just make out the railing under the blinds. The first thing to note is the blinds aren't completely closed, which suggests someone on the outside at the parking lot could easily see inside, especially if the light was on at night. Second, and I've actually stood right outside that house while it was still standing, there's a very weird idiosyncrasy of that house in just how intimate, how close the road is to that balcony, and where one would park on that road to that balcony. Have a look at this photo taken on that balcony right outside Maddie's room, and have a look at how close the vehicle is in the back. And that's not even the closest you can get to that balcony. But the point is, you are not only level with it, but it feels like if you just lean forward, you can touch it. Yes, the same balcony from another angle. Notice the vehicles in the background. Those vehicles, by the way, aren't parked as close as you can park to the side of the house. I think Kohberger often spied on Maddie, possibly from inside his vehicle, looking at her right inside her room. And I do think those pink boots would have gotten someone who was on the outside's attention. And I think Kohberger's many visits to Moscow, often nocturnal visits, were to do just that. And over time, isn't that how he developed a sort of connection to Maddie, certainly in his mind, which I suspect he tried to build on by contacting her through her social media, perhaps trying to encounter her at the Mad Greek restaurant. Of course, there's no proof of this, but I do think it makes sense. Fox News actually took video of those boots being removed during the final cleaning up of the home. But in any event, this familiarity would explain why Kohberger covered her and none of the other victims, because I think with her it was personal. What do you think? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.